my name's David, and lately, I've been feeling like I've stepped into the twilight zone of my own life. For years, my wife Laura and I had what felt like a solid marriage. Sure, we weren't perfect, who is, but we had trust, laughter, and a bond built over 15 years together. At least, that's what I thought. The signs started creeping in about 6 months ago, little things that were easy to dismiss at first. Laura began coming home later than usual, her excuses varied but always sounded just plausible enough not to question. Work's been crazy, she'd say, dropping her purse on the kitchen counter before disappearing into the bedroom. Or, Maggie wanted to grab drinks after Pilates, she'd mention casually, brushing past me like it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't the lateness itself that got to me, it was how distant she felt even when she was here. Laura, who used to tell me every detail of her day, now seemed closed off, like she had a whole other life she wasn't willing to share. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I'd been too busy with work, too distracted to give her the attention she deserved. But as time went on, I realized something wasn't adding up. Tuesday night brought everything into sharper focus. It was one of those rare evenings when I got to leave work early, and on the way home, I decided to pick up Laura's favorite sushi. She loved surprises, or at least she used to, and I figured a quiet dinner together might help us reconnect. When I walked through the front door, the house was dark and eerily quiet. Laura's car was parked in the driveway, so I knew she was home. "Laura?" I called out, my voice echoing in the silence. There was no response at first, just the faint sound of movement upstairs. I headed into the kitchen to set down the takeout bags and called her name again, louder this time. A moment later, Laura appeared at the top of the stairs. Her hair was styled in loose waves that looked freshly done, and she was wearing a red dress I hadn't seen in years, one I distinctly remembered her calling too dressy for casual evenings. "Oh, you home early," she said, her tone light but with an edge of nervousness that caught my attention. "I thought I'd surprise you," I replied, forcing a smile as I looked her over. "Where were you?" She hesitated for a split second, but then her answer came quickly, too quickly. "Nowhere. Just upstairs." "Upstairs?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Yes. I was reading. Relaxing." She waved her hand dismissively as she walked past me into the kitchen. "Relaxing? In a dress like that?" I didn't press her, but I didn't drop it, either. Over dinner, she seemed distracted, her phone buzzing periodically on the counter. Each time it lit up, she'd glance at the screen and then flip it face down, pretending it was nothing. That night, lying in bed, my mind wouldn't stop spinning. What was she hiding? And why? The following days felt like a slow unraveling. Laura's behavior only became more suspicious. Her phone, which she used to leave lying around the house, was now glued to her side. She'd angle it away from me when texting, or leave the room entirely to take calls. When I asked her about her day, her answers were vague, almost rehearsed. Then came Friday. I walked into the living room after finishing some emails in my office and found Laura sitting on the couch, her phone in her hand and a faint smile on her lips. She was so engrossed in whatever was on the screen that she didn't even notice me at first. "What's so funny?" I asked casually, leaning on the doorframe. She jumped slightly, locking the screen before setting the phone down beside her. "Oh, nothing. Just a meme Maggie sent me." Maggie again. Her explanation felt flimsy, but I let it slide. Still, my gut told me there was more to this than a funny meme. That night, I made up my mind. If Laura was hiding something, I needed to find out. And I wasn't going to sit around waiting for her to slip up. I started small. When she went to bed early, claiming she had a headache, I stayed up and took a look at her phone. It was locked, but the notifications on the home screen told a story of their own, and multiple messages from someone named Jay. I didn't recognize the name, and that bothered me. Laura and I had been together long enough that I knew most of her friends, at least by name. But, Jay? Whoever it was, they seemed to be messaging her at all hours. Over the weekend, I began paying closer attention to her patterns. On Saturday afternoon, she claimed she needed to run errands and left the house for hours. When I offered to come with her, she quickly declined, saying it would go faster if she went alone. She came back with only a single shopping bag, hardly the haul you'd expect after spending 3 hours shopping. By Sunday night, I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my chest. Laura was hiding something, and I was done playing the clueless husband. Whatever was going on, I was going to get to the bottom of it. By Monday morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just a gut instinct, there had been signs for months. Little things that, at first, I brushed off as normal relationship hiccups. But now, after finding that strange text from Jay on Laura's phone, everything felt like it was clicking into place. The distance between us had been growing for a while. At first, it was small, she stopped asking me about my day or laughing at my jokes. Then it became more noticeable. Date nights were rare, conversations were shallow, and worst of all, the intimacy we once shared had all but vanished. It had been weeks since she'd shown any interest in being close to me. Every time I tried to initiate something, she'd come up with an excuse. "I'm too tired," she'd say. Or, "Work's been draining me lately." I believed her at first. We'd been married long enough to know that life gets in the way sometimes, but this was different. It wasn't just a lack of physical connection, it felt like she was deliberately shutting me out. That morning, I decided I couldn't ignore the signs any longer. Laura had left her phone charging on the counter while she showered, something she rarely did these days. As I walked by, the screen lit up with a notification. It was a message from someone named Jay. "Last night was incredible. Can't wait to see you again." My stomach tightened. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. This wasn't a work text or a friendly message. It was exactly what it looked like. I didn't touch the phone, I didn't need to. Instead, I grabbed a pen and wrote down the number from the message on a scrap of paper. By the time Laura came downstairs, humming a tune as she got ready for work, the paper was tucked safely in my wallet. "Morning," she said cheerfully, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "Morning," I replied, forcing a smile. She kissed me on the cheek, grabbed her phone, and glanced at the screen before slipping it into her purse. The small smile that played on her lips wasn't for me, and I knew it. That afternoon, while Laura was running errands, I decided to investigate further. Using a reverse phone lookup service, I tracked down the number from the message. It belonged to someone named Jacob Turner. I didn't recognize the name, but it felt like a punch to the gut anyway. Was this a coworker? A gym friend? Or was this the person she'd been texting late at night when she thought I wasn't paying attention? As I pieced together the clues, other memories began to surface. The times she'd brushed me off with vague excuses, the nights she'd stayed out late claiming to be working on a project, and, of course, the distance in our bedroom. By the end of the week, I couldn't shake the tension that had settled over me. Friday gave me the perfect opportunity to test her. "I'll be working late tonight," I told her casually over breakfast. "Oh," she said, barely masking her relief. "That's fine. I might just have a quiet night at home." "Sounds good," I replied, watching her closely. After leaving the house, I parked my car a block away and waited. Sure enough, about an hour later, a silver sedan pulled into the driveway. A man stepped out, tall, well-dressed, and confident in a way that made my blood boil. Laura opened the door almost immediately, her face lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in years. She greeted him with a hug, and they disappeared inside together. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. 2 hours later, the man left. Laura texted me shortly after. "Don't forget to grab some milk on your way home." When I walked through the door, she greeted me with the same warm smile she always used to cover her tracks. "How was your day?" she asked, her tone as casual as ever. Busy, I replied, setting the milk on the counter. Yours? Oh, nothing exciting, she said, turning back to the stove. Just caught up on some reading. Her lies were seamless, almost rehearsed. The next morning, while Laura was in the shower, I opened her laptop. Unlike her phone, it wasn't password protected. I sifted through her emails, finding confirmation of a hotel booking under the name J. Turner. The date matched the week she claimed to be away for a work retreat. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. This wasn't just suspicion anymore, it was proof. But instead of confronting her, I decided to wait. If I was going to confront Laura, I needed to be in complete control. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, she laughed at something on her phone, oblivious to the fact that her world was about to crumble. I smiled back, playing my role perfectly. By the time the weekend arrived, I had collected enough hints and half-truths to know I wasn't imagining things. The name Jacob Turner and the interactions I'd witnessed weren't just coincidences, they were pieces of a bigger puzzle. The problem was, I didn't have the full picture yet. But I was determined to get it. That Saturday morning, Laura mentioned she had plans to meet some friends for brunch. Normally, this would seem like a casual, innocent outing, but now, everything she said felt loaded with ulterior motives. Maggie and I are trying out that new place downtown, she said as she applied her makeup at the bathroom mirror. Sounds fun, I replied, sipping my coffee at the doorway. She glanced at me briefly. You've got that project to finish today, right? Or are you free? The question felt too deliberate, as though she were gauging whether she'd have the house to herself. Yeah, I said, leaning casually against the frame. I'll probably be tied up with work for most of the day. Her shoulders relaxed, just a fraction, and she smiled. Well, enjoy it. I'll see you later. I nodded, watching as she grabbed her purse and walked out the door. As soon as I heard her car pull out of the driveway, I grabbed my keys and followed at a safe distance. Laura's car weaved through downtown traffic before finally parking near a boutique hotel. My stomach didn't churn, my breath didn't hitch, this time, there was only calm determination. She stepped out, wearing a dress I hadn't seen in years, the kind of outfit she used to reserve for date nights with me. But she wasn't meeting Maggie, and she wasn't here for brunch. I parked a block away and waited, watching as she approached the entrance. Moments later, a man stepped out to meet her. Even from this distance, I could recognize him, it was Jacob Turner. They exchanged smiles and a quick hug before heading inside. I didn't follow them immediately. Instead, I waited a few minutes, my mind racing as I considered my next move. I didn't want to confront them yet, I needed to be smarter than that. I wanted undeniable proof, something they couldn't explain away. The hotel lobby was quiet when I stepped inside. I kept my head down and pretended to scroll on my phone, making my way to the front desk. Excuse me, I said to the receptionist, flashing a friendly smile. I think my wife just checked in here. She left her phone in the car, and I wanted to drop it off. The young woman behind the desk looked up, clearly used to requests like this. What's the name? Laura Matthews, I said confidently, though I wasn't sure if she'd registered under her real name. She scanned her computer, then nodded. Room 412. Thank you, I said, turning toward the elevators. As I rode up, my heart didn't pound in my chest, I felt eerily calm, as though every step was part of a script I'd rehearsed in my mind. When I reached the 4th floor, I walked down the hallway, stopping in front of room 412. For a moment, I stood there, listening. Muffled voices came through the door, followed by soft laughter. It was enough to confirm what I already knew. I didn't knock. Instead, I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo of the room number and the "Do Not Disturb" sign hanging on the handle. I considered my options. Busting in would only create a scene, and I wasn't here for drama, I was here for control. I turned and walked back to the elevator, my plan already forming. That evening, Laura returned home as if nothing had happened. She greeted me with the same warm smile and even leaned in for a kiss on the cheek. "How was your day?" she asked, setting her purse on the counter. "Busy," I said casually. "Yours?" "Oh, you know," she replied, opening the fridge to grab a bottle of water. "Brunch was great, and then Maggie and I did some shopping." It was incredible how easily she lied. The words rolled off her tongue as though they were second nature. "That's nice," I said, keeping my tone light. We had dinner together, and Laura chatted about the mundane details of her afternoon with Maggie. I nodded and smiled at all the right moments, but inside, I was already planning my next move. The next morning, while Laura was out jogging, I reviewed the photo I'd taken of the hotel room. I uploaded it to a secure folder along with screenshots of the emails I'd found on her laptop and the text messages from Jay. I wanted more than just circumstantial evidence. I wanted to catch them in a situation they couldn't deny or explain away. By the time Laura returned from her jog, I had already scheduled an appointment with a private investigator. If I was going to confront her, I needed the truth laid bare in a way she couldn't refute. When we sat down for dinner that night, Laura seemed relaxed, even happy. She laughed at something on TV and asked about my day, completely unaware that her lies were beginning to unravel. I smiled at her, playing my role perfectly. But inside, I knew our marriage was already over. The only question was how it would end. The private investigator was quick, efficient, and discreet. When I met him in his small, sparsely decorated office on Monday, he didn't ask unnecessary questions. His business wasn't morality, it was evidence. "I need to know everything," I told him, sliding an envelope of cash across the desk. "Her schedule, who she's meeting, where she's going. I need pictures, times, dates, everything." The man nodded, tucking the envelope into his drawer. "Give me a week, and you'll have what you're looking for." As I left his office, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't alone in this. Someone else was working to uncover the truth, and it gave me the clarity to start thinking about my next steps. That week, Laura's behavior became even more blatant. She spent hours texting on her phone, often smiling to herself as she typed. When I asked her what she was so busy with, she brushed me off with a casual, "Just Maggie. She's going through some things." Maggie was becoming her favorite scapegoat, and I played along, nodding and pretending to believe her. But the real test came on Friday. Laura told me she'd be working late, and while she'd used this excuse before, this time I didn't let it slide so easily. "Late again?" I asked, setting my coffee mug on the counter. "Yeah," she replied, her tone almost dismissive. "Big project coming up. You know how it is." "Of course," I said with a smile. "I'll be here if you need anything." The subtle hesitation in her movements was all I needed to confirm my suspicions. She wasn't used to me being so accommodating, and it threw her off just enough to make her glance at me longer than usual before heading out the door. I didn't follow her this time. I didn't have to. At 10:30 p.m., the private investigator sent me an email. It included timestamps, locations, and, most importantly, photographs. Laura wasn't at work. She was at the same boutique hotel where I'd seen her before, meeting Jacob Turner. The photos were damning, Laura and Jacob sitting close together at the hotel bar, laughing and leaning in as if they were the only two people in the world. Another showed them heading upstairs together, arms brushing as they walked. The Pi's email was professional, almost detached, but it was clear he'd delivered exactly what I'd asked for. Client request complete. Let me know if further surveillance is needed. I stared at the photos for a long time. There was no longer any doubt, no room for Laura to twist the truth. The next morning, Laura acted as though nothing had happened. She greeted me with a bright smile, asking if I'd slept well. "Fine," I said evenly, watching her pour herself a cup of coffee. "How was work?" "Oh, you know," she said, brushing her hair over her shoulder. Late night, but productive. I nodded, keeping my face neutral. That's good. Glad to hear it. For a moment, I thought she might catch on. My tone was too calm, my words too measured. But she just smiled and kissed me on the cheek before heading off to take a shower. By the time Sunday rolled around, I had already put the next phase of my plan into motion. I wasn't going to confront her yet, not until I had everything in place. The first step was ensuring that Laura couldn't manipulate the narrative. I called my lawyer, an old friend who'd helped me draft our will years ago, and explained the situation. I want to file for divorce, I told him. But I want the terms to favor me. Can we do that? If you've got proof of infidelity, you've got a strong case, he said. Get me copies of everything, texts, emails, photos. The more evidence, the better. I sent him everything the investigator had gathered, along with screenshots of the emails I'd found on Laura's laptop. By the time we hung up, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The second step was preparing for the fallout. I began quietly moving money out of our joint accounts and into a separate account in my name. It wasn't illegal, just protective. I wasn't going to leave myself vulnerable to whatever tricks Laura might pull once she realized what was happening. That evening, I made a point of being overly kind to Laura. I cooked her favorite dinner, opened a bottle of wine, and even suggested we watch a movie together. She seemed surprised but didn't question it. What's the occasion? She asked, raising an eyebrow as she sipped her wine. Just wanted to do something nice, I said with a smile. If she felt guilty, she didn't show it. She leaned back on the couch, relaxed and oblivious, while I mentally reviewed my plan. By the time Laura went to bed, I had everything I needed. The photos, the emails, the texts, it was all compiled into a neat folder on my computer, ready to be used when the time was right. I sat alone in the living room, staring at the screen. The evidence was undeniable, but it wasn't just about proving she'd cheated. It was about reclaiming control over my life, my home, and my future. I wasn't going to let Laura or Jacob walk away from this unscathed. The week started quietly, as it always did. Laura sat at the kitchen table, phone in hand, scrolling through something that seemed to amuse her. She looked relaxed, as if the weight of her lies didn't exist. I watched her for a moment before speaking. Got a lot going on today? I asked, taking a sip of my coffee. She looked up briefly, her expression neutral. Yeah, same as always. Meetings, emails, you know how it is. I nodded. Let me know if you need anything. Thanks, she said, her focus already back on her screen. She had no idea I was already putting my plan into motion. That afternoon, I made the first move. Finding Jacob Turner's workplace had been easy, his name was listed on a real estate firm's website. I dialed the office, my voice steady as the receptionist answered. Good afternoon, Turner and Associates, she said. Hi, I replied, keeping my tone professional. Could I speak with Jacob Turner, please? Mr. Turner is currently in a meeting, she said. Can I take a message? Sure, I said smoothly. Please let him know David Matthews called. I wanted to follow up on our discussion from last week. I'll make sure he gets the message, she replied. Thank you, I said, hanging up. I didn't need to speak to Jacob. This wasn't about direct confrontation, it was about planting doubt. Letting him know my name was the first step in making him feel exposed. That evening, I sent Laura a text while she was still at work. Dinner's ready when you get home. I've got something nice planned. Her reply was almost instant. Looking forward to it. By the time she walked through the door, the house was filled with the smell of garlic and rosemary. I'd prepared a meal that looked as good as it smelled, and the table was set with wine and candles. What's the occasion? She asked, smiling as she walked in. No reason, I said, handing her a glass of wine. Just thought we could enjoy a nice evening. She sat down, her posture relaxed, and took a sip. Well, this is a pleasant surprise. We talked as we ate, our conversation light and unremarkable. Laura stuck to her vague explanations about work, while I nodded and asked casual questions. Halfway through the meal, I asked, "Do you know someone named Jacob Turner?" Her reaction was small but telling. She paused briefly before shaking her head. "No, I don't think so." "Why?" "I thought I heard his name at one of your work events," I said casually. "Maybe I'm mistaken." "Yeah, probably," she said with a soft laugh. Her lie was smooth, but not flawless. The next day, I moved to the second phase of my plan. Using an anonymous email account, I sent a message to Jacob's boss, attaching one of the photos the private investigator had taken of him and Laura. The subject line was simple: "For your attention." The message read, "You might want to look into how one of your employees is spending company time." I didn't expect an immediate response, but by Wednesday, the results were clear. My investigator confirmed that Jacob had been called into a private meeting with his superiors. Whatever explanation he gave clearly didn't hold up, because by the end of the day, his name and profile were removed from the company website. That evening, Laura was sitting on the couch, her phone glowing in her hands as she scrolled through her messages. She laughed softly at something, completely oblivious to the chaos I had started in Jacob's life. "How's Maggie?" I asked casually, nodding toward her phone. "Oh, she's fine," Laura said without looking up. I nodded and went back to reading, already planning my next move. On Thursday, I widened my net. Using another anonymous account, I sent the photos and screenshots of emails to several of Laura's closest friends. The message was short. "I thought you might want to know what Laura has been up to. Ask her about Jacob Turner." By Saturday morning, the effects were beginning to show. Laura was unusually quiet during breakfast, her phone buzzing repeatedly with messages. She glanced at it nervously but didn't pick it up. "Everything okay?" I asked, pretending to be concerned. "Yeah, just some drama with Maggie," she said quickly, forcing a smile. "Sounds serious," I said, gesturing to her phone. "It's nothing," she said, laughing awkwardly. But the cracks were beginning to show. That night, Laura went to bed early, saying she wasn't feeling well. I stayed up late, organizing the evidence I'd gathered. The photos, the emails, the texts, all of it was now neatly stored and ready to be used when the time came. Jacob had already paid the price for his involvement, but Laura's reckoning was just beginning. This wasn't just about ending our marriage. It was about making sure she understood exactly what her betrayal had cost me. Sunday morning started with a noticeable shift in Laura's demeanor. She sat at the breakfast table with her phone in hand, her usual air of confidence replaced by something more subdued. She scrolled through messages, her lips pressed into a thin line, and barely acknowledged me when I sat down across from her. "Busy morning already?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. Laura glanced up, startled, then quickly forced a smile. "Oh, just catching up on texts. Maggie's got her usual drama." "Seems like she's always got something going on," I replied, sipping my coffee. "Yeah, she does," Laura said, her voice tight. Her response was too quick, her smile too forced. She wasn't just reading messages, she was trying to figure something out, and I had a good idea what that might be. That afternoon, I decided it was time to escalate. Over the past week, I had gathered enough evidence to destroy the web of lies Laura had been spinning, but now I needed to tighten the net. My private investigators' reports included detailed records of her trips to a boutique hotel downtown, complete with dates, times, and confirmation of her companion, Jacob Turner. I called the hotel, adopting a polite but concerned tone. "Good afternoon," I began. "This is David Matthews. I believe my wife, Laura Matthews, stayed with you recently. I'm trying to locate a specific booking for some personal matters." The receptionist hesitated. "Let me check for you." "What date would this have been?" "Last Tuesday," I replied, pretending to think for a moment. There was a brief pause before she returned. "Yes, I see a reservation under Laura Matthews. Is there something specific you needed?" "No, that's all," I said smoothly. "Thank you for your help." The confirmation was just another piece of the puzzle, but it reinforced what I already knew: Laura had no idea her lies were unraveling around her. By Monday, Laura's behavior had shifted again. She was quieter, more withdrawn, spending longer stretches of time locked away in the bedroom or scrolling through her phone. That evening, as we sat in the living room, I decided to plant another seed. "You ever think about how fragile life is?" I asked suddenly, breaking the silence. She frowned, looking up from her screen. "What do you mean?" "I mean how quickly things can fall apart," I said, leaning back in my chair. "One decision, one mistake, and everything changes." Laura blinked, her expression guarded. "That's kind of a dark thought." "Maybe," I replied. "But it's true." She didn't respond, turning her attention back to her phone, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. She was starting to feel the weight of what was happening, even if she couldn't pinpoint its source yet. The next morning, I pushed things further. Using a burner email account, I sent an anonymous message to Maggie, Laura's closest friend. The message was short. "Ask Laura about Jacob Turner. You deserve to know the truth." I knew Maggie well enough to predict how she'd react. She wasn't the type to sit quietly with suspicions; she'd confront Laura directly, and that was exactly what I wanted. By Tuesday evening, the confrontation I had anticipated finally happened. Laura's phone rang during dinner, and she excused herself to take the call in the other room. I stayed seated, eating my meal calmly, but I could hear her voice rising from the kitchen. "What are you talking about?" she snapped, her tone sharp. "Where did you even hear that?" Maggie's voice was too muffled for me to make out her exact words, but it was clear she wasn't letting Laura off the hook easily. "I don't know where this is coming from," Laura continued, her voice shaking slightly. "This is ridiculous." The call ended abruptly, and Laura returned to the dining room, her face pale. "Everything okay?" I asked, pretending to be concerned. "Yeah," she said curtly, sitting down with a forced smile. "Just Maggie being dramatic again." "Must be exhausting," I said, watching her closely. She didn't reply, focusing on her plate instead. That night, as Laura went to bed early, I stayed up reviewing the evidence I'd gathered. My investigators' reports, the emails, the texts, the photos, all of it was now neatly organized into a digital folder. This wasn't just about exposing her lies, it was about dismantling the life she had built on deception. The next phase of my plan would take things to a new level. I wasn't content with Laura feeling the heat from her friends; I wanted Jacob to feel it too. The following day, I made the first move toward direct confrontation. I scheduled an appointment with Jacob Turner under the guise of being a potential client. It was time to make sure he knew exactly who I was and what I intended to do. Laura thought she could control this narrative, but she was about to realize just how wrong she had been. Wednesday morning arrived, and I was more focused than ever. The tension in the house had become palpable. Laura was quieter than usual, her movements cautious and deliberate. She must have sensed that something was wrong, but she didn't dare voice her concerns. I, on the other hand, was ready for the next step. It was time to move beyond the shadows and confront this mess head-on. The pieces were in place, the evidence was undeniable, and I wasn't going to let either Laura or Jacob escape the consequences of their actions. That afternoon, I arrived at Jacob Turner's office. I had called earlier to schedule an appointment, posing as a prospective client. He didn't know my name, and I made sure to use a different one. The receptionist greeted me with a warm smile. "Mr. Turner will see you shortly," she said, gesturing toward the waiting area. I nodded, sitting down and glancing around the sleek, modern office. It was almost comical. Jacob had built a life of professional success, only to jeopardize it all for an affair. "Mr. Smith," the receptionist called, and I stood, adjusting my jacket. Jacob was waiting for me in his office, a confident grin plastered on his face. He extended a hand. "It's great to meet you. What can I do for you today?" I shook his hand, forcing a polite smile. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice." He motioned for me to sit, his demeanor completely professional. "So, you looking to buy property?" I leaned back in the chair, studying him for a moment before speaking. "Actually, Jacob, I'm not here to talk about real estate." His confident expression faltered. "Oh." I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, placing it on the desk between us. "I'm here to talk about Laura Matthews." His face drained of color. He glanced at the folder but didn't make a move to open it. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice tight. "Don't insult me," I said sharply. "I know everything. The emails, the photos, the hotel reservations, it's all in there. You've been having an affair with my wife." Jacob's jaw tightened. "Look, I think you've got the wrong idea." I cut him off. "Save it. I'm not here to listen to your excuses." For a moment, the room was silent except for the ticking of a nearby clock. Then Jacob leaned forward, his voice dropping. "What do you want?" I smiled coldly. "I don't want anything from you. I'm just here to make sure you understand that your life, as you know it, is about to change. I've already sent this folder to your employer. That's why you lost your job, in case you were wondering." His eyes widened, and he opened his mouth to speak, but I wasn't finished. "Your personal life is next," I continued. "This isn't just about Laura. I'm going to make sure everyone in your circle knows exactly what kind of man you are." Jacob's confidence was completely shattered. He looked down at the desk, avoiding my gaze. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," he muttered. "Of course you didn't," I said with a hint of sarcasm. "Men like you never do. But it did happen, and now you're going to live with the consequences." I stood, gathering the folder and slipping it back into my bag. "Consider this your warning, Jacob. Stay away from Laura, and stay out of my life. If I see or hear about you again, I won't be nearly as civil." Without waiting for a response, I walked out of the office, leaving him to stew in his own fear and regret. When I arrived home that evening, Laura was sitting on the couch, her face pale. She looked up as I walked in, her eyes searching mine for any hint of what I knew. "You're home late," she said, her voice shaky. "Busy day," I replied, setting my bag down. "How was yours?" "Fine," she said quickly. "Nothing out of the ordinary." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Good to hear." As I sat down across from her, I could feel the tension thickening in the room. Laura was holding something back, and I wasn't about to let her off the hook. "By the way," I said casually, "I stopped by Jacob Turner's office today." Her reaction was instant. Her eyes widened, and she sat up straighter. You what?" "I thought it was time to meet him face to face," I said, watching her carefully. "We had a very interesting conversation." Laura's hands trembled as she clasped them in her lap. "David, I can explain." "Don't bother," I interrupted. "I've already heard enough lies from you." She stared at me, her face pale, and for the first time, she was completely at a loss for words. "I know everything," I continued, my voice calm but firm. "The emails, the texts, the hotel rooms, I've seen it all." Tears filled her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. "David, please. This isn't the time for begging," I said sharply. "You made your choices, Laura. Now you're going to deal with the fallout." She broke down, sobbing into her hands, but I didn't move to comfort her. Instead, I stood, looking down at her with cold resolve. "This is just the beginning," I said quietly. "You don't get to destroy our life and walk away unscathed." Without another word, I left the room, leaving her alone with her guilt and the reality of what was coming next. The morning after Laura's failed attempt at reconciliation, the house felt different. She wasn't waiting for me in the kitchen like she usually was. Instead, I found her in the living room, staring blankly at her phone, her face pale. "Rough morning?" I asked casually, grabbing a cup of coffee. She glanced at me, her expression a mix of exhaustion and fear. "I need to talk to you," she said quietly. "Do you?" I replied, raising an eyebrow. "I thought we said everything that needed to be said last night." "David, please," she started, her voice cracking. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But we can fix this." "We can?" I cut her off with a cold laugh. "Fix this? Laura, you can't fix something you've already destroyed. This isn't a broken plate we can glue back together. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it." She opened her mouth as if to argue, but no words came out. For the first time, she looked truly defeated, and I wasn't about to give her any room to recover. That afternoon, I finalized the divorce paperwork. The lawyer I'd hired, Amanda Cole, had crafted a brutal set of terms that left no room for negotiation. Laura wouldn't just lose me, she'd lose the comfort and stability she had taken for granted. "Everything looks solid," Amanda said as she handed me the final draft. "We'll file this first thing tomorrow." I nodded, feeling a sense of satisfaction as I signed the papers. This was more than a legal process, it was the foundation for my new life. As I left the lawyer's office, my phone buzzed with a message from Maggie. "David, Laura's been calling me nonstop. She's falling apart. What's going on?" I didn't respond. Maggie didn't need to hear my side of the story, not yet. Laura was unraveling, and I wanted to give her just enough rope to hang herself. By the time I got home, Laura had made another attempt to mend the situation. She'd cleaned the house, prepared an elaborate dinner, and even set the table with candles and wine. "Seriously?" I said, crossing my arms as I surveyed the scene. "What's this supposed to be?" She looked up from the stove, her eyes red and puffy. I wanted to do something nice for us. To show you that I'm willing to try." "To try what?" I shot back. "To cover up the months of lies? To erase the fact that you humiliated me with some random guy?" Her hands trembled as she turned off the burner. "David, please. I'm sorry. I was stupid, I was selfish, but I still love you. That hasn't changed." "Love?" I repeated bitterly. "Is that what you call what you did? Lying to me every day, sneaking around behind my back, that's love to you?" Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't care. I was past the point of sympathy. "You don't get to play the victim here," I said sharply. "You made your choices, Laura. Now it's time to face the consequences." The next morning, I filed the divorce papers. I didn't tell Laura, I wanted her to be blindsided when she received the official notice. Instead, I spent the day putting the final touches on my plan to dismantle her carefully curated life. I uploaded the folder of evidence I'd gathered, photos, emails, hotel receipts, to a secure server and shared the link with a few key people in her social circle. The message was simple. If you think you know Laura, you might want to think again. Here's what she's been hiding. I sent the email and turned off notifications on my phone, knowing the fallout would be swift and brutal. By the time I returned home that evening, the cracks were beginning to show. Laura was pacing the living room, her phone pressed to her ear. "I don't know who's doing this," she was saying frantically. "But it's not true. You have to believe me." Her voice broke as she listened to the person on the other end. "Please, Maggie, you're my best friend. You know me. She turned and saw me standing in the doorway. Her expression shifted from desperation to anger. You behind this, aren't you? She demanded, her voice shaking. Behind what? I asked innocently. The emails. The photos, she shouted, her face contorted with rage. You trying to ruin me? Ruin you? I repeated, stepping closer. No, Laura. You ruined yourself. All I did was make sure the truth came out. Her fists clenched at her sides. Do you want me to lose everything? Is that what this is about? Yes, I said simply. You don't get to walk away from this unscathed. You destroyed our marriage, you betrayed me, and now you're paying the price. That night, as Laura cried herself to sleep in the bedroom, I sat in the living room with a glass of whiskey, reflecting on everything that had brought me to this moment. There was no turning back now. The life we had shared was over, and I was finally reclaiming control. But I wasn't done yet. Jacob Turner had gotten off too easily, and I wasn't about to let him slip away unpunished. The final phase of my plan was already in motion. The divorce papers had been filed, Laura's reputation was in shambles, and the fallout from the emails I'd sent was spreading like wildfire. Mutual friends, her colleagues, even distant acquaintances, everyone was talking. Laura had spent years building an image of a devoted wife and social butterfly, and now that image was in pieces. But this wasn't over. Not yet. Jacob Turner had managed to avoid the full weight of the consequences so far, and I wasn't about to let him slip through the cracks. If Laura thought she could save face by blaming him, and if Jacob thought he could walk away unscathed, they were both sorely mistaken. The first part of my plan was simple: I needed leverage against Jacob. Over the past few weeks, my private investigator had dug deep, uncovering more than just his affair with Laura. Jacob had a skeleton or two in his closet, one of them being a history of unethical deals in his real estate business. Using the information, I crafted an anonymous tip and sent it to the local real estate board. The email included copies of falsified documents, questionable contracts, and client complaints that had been swept under the rug. I knew it wouldn't take long for the board to open an investigation, and once they did, Jacob's professional life would unravel even further. But I wasn't stopping there. The next morning, I made a call to Jacob's wife, a woman I'd learned about through my investigator. Her name was Rachel, and from what I'd gathered, she was a no-nonsense type who wouldn't take kindly to betrayal. "Hello," she answered, her voice cautious. "Rachel Turner?" I asked. "Yes, who's this?" "This is David Matthews," I said calmly. "You don't know me, but I have information about your husband that I think you deserve to hear." There was a pause on the other end. "What kind of information?" I took a deep breath. "Your husband has been having an affair with my wife, Laura. I have evidence, photos, emails, hotel records. I know this is difficult to hear, but I thought it was better for you to know the truth." The silence stretched on for so long that I thought she might have hung up. But then she spoke, her voice cold and steady. "Send me the evidence." I forwarded everything to her within minutes. Rachel didn't reply, but I didn't expect her to. I knew she'd confront Jacob on her own terms, and that confrontation would be explosive. That evening, I returned home to find Laura in a state of panic. She was pacing the living room, clutching her phone and muttering under her breath. "They're all turning on me," she said, her voice cracking when she noticed me. "Maggie, the others, they won't even answer my calls anymore." "What did you do, David?" I raised an eyebrow. "What did I do?" "You did this, Laura. You lied to everyone, betrayed me, and now you're facing the consequences." Her face twisted in anger. "You're enjoying this, aren't you? Watching me suffer." "Enjoying it?" I repeated. "No. But I'm not going to apologize for making sure the truth comes out. You made your bed, Laura. Now lie in it. She collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. For a moment, I almost felt pity for her. But then I remembered the months of lies, the betrayal, and the humiliation, and any sympathy I might have felt evaporated. The next day, I received an update from my investigator. The real estate board had launched an official inquiry into Jacob's practices, and Rachel Turner had confronted her husband. Apparently, their fight had been loud enough to involve a neighbor, who called the police after hearing shouting and glass breaking. Jacob's life was officially in free fall. I decided to add fuel to the fire. I reached out to a local journalist known for exposing scandals, anonymously providing him with the same information I'd sent to the real estate board. Within hours, he responded, expressing interest in publishing a story about the unethical practices in Jacob's firm. "Consider it done," he wrote. I smiled. By the time this story hit the headlines, Jacob's professional reputation would be completely destroyed. That evening, Laura made one last attempt to salvage the situation. She approached me while I was sitting at the dining table, going over the final details of the divorce. "David," she said softly, sitting down across from me. "Can we talk?" I didn't look up. "What is there to talk about, Laura?" "We're past that." "I know I hurt you," she said, her voice trembling. "But I've lost everything, my friends, my reputation, even Jacob. I have nothing left. Please, can't we just find a way to move forward?" I set my pen down and finally looked at her. "Move forward? After everything you've done?" "No, Laura. You don't get to rewrite the story to make yourself the victim." Tears filled her eyes, but I didn't stop. "You betrayed me, you lied to everyone who cared about you, and you dragged my name through the mud," I continued. "You don't deserve forgiveness. You deserve exactly what you're getting." She sobbed openly, but I felt nothing. The Laura I had loved was gone, replaced by someone I didn't even recognize. Later that night, I received a text from Maggie. "You've been quiet through all this. Are you okay?" I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. The destruction I had wrought wasn't about making myself feel better, it was about reclaiming control over my life. Laura and Jacob had tried to build something on the foundation of lies, and now that foundation had crumbled. As I sat alone in the living room, the house eerily quiet, I felt a sense of closure beginning to settle over me. This wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about freedom. By Friday, the full weight of my actions was starting to take its toll. Laura had become a shadow of the confident, self-assured woman she once was. Her eyes were puffy from crying, her voice cracked whenever she tried to argue, and she had retreated into herself. The house, once full of her chatter and presence, was now eerily quiet. But for me, this silence was a victory. I wasn't finished yet, though. There were still loose ends to tie up, and I was determined to ensure neither Laura nor Jacob escaped the consequences of their betrayal. That morning, I revisited the evidence my private investigator had gathered on Jacob. Among the photos, emails, and other damning proof of his affair with Laura, there was one particularly valuable piece of information, evidence of financial misconduct in his real estate firm. Jacob had been skimming money from client accounts, falsifying documents, and using those funds to cover personal expenses. It wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. I forwarded the documents to the State Attorney General's office, accompanied by a detailed explanation of what the investigator had uncovered. This wasn't just about exposing Jacob for his personal failings. This was about destroying every aspect of his life, leaving no stone unturned. While I waited for the legal wheels to start turning, I focused on Laura. Her involvement with the local charity board had always been a source of pride for her. She loved to brag about her contributions, the events she organized, and how much respect she commanded in that circle. I made a call to the director of the board, keeping my tone calm but direct. "Good morning," I began. "This is David Matthews. I'm calling about Laura Matthews, one of your board members." The director hesitated. Yes, what about her? I think it's important for you to be aware of some behavior that might reflect poorly on your organization, I said. She's been involved in an affair that she used board events to facilitate. I've sent you evidence that I believe warrants your attention. I could hear the shock in the director's voice. This is concerning. If what you're saying is true, we'll need to take immediate action. It is, I assured her. The evidence will make that clear. By the end of the call, I was confident Laura's days on the board were numbered. That afternoon, I received a message from my private investigator that the state attorney's office had responded to the evidence, and they were opening an investigation into Jacob. It wouldn't be long before he was facing charges. But that wasn't enough. I wanted his downfall to be public, to strip away any shred of dignity he might have left. I contacted a local journalist who specialized in uncovering scandals. Using an anonymous email account, I provided him with the details of Jacob's financial misconduct, along with evidence of his affair with Laura. Within an hour, the journalist replied, eager to pursue the story. "Thank you for this," he wrote. "I'll make sure the truth gets out." By the time the article was published, Jacob's name would be synonymous with corruption and deceit. That evening, Laura confronted me. She was pacing the living room, her phone clutched tightly in her hand, tears streaming down her face. "You've ruined my life," she screamed, her voice trembling with rage. I looked at her calmly. "I didn't ruin your life, Laura. You did that yourself. I just made sure everyone else knew the truth." She threw her phone onto the couch, her hands shaking. "Why are you doing this? Haven't you done enough?" "Enough?" I repeated, standing up and stepping closer. "Do you even hear yourself? You lied to me. You betrayed me. You humiliated me. And you think I should just let it go?" Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she choked out. "But it did," I said, my voice ice cold. "And now you have to live with the consequences." The next morning, the fallout reached its peak. The journalist's exposé on Jacob's misconduct went live, detailing not only his financial crimes but also his affair with Laura. Social media exploded with reactions, and Jacob's name became a trending topic for all the wrong reasons. By mid-afternoon, my investigator informed me that the charity board had officially removed Laura from her position. She hadn't just lost her reputation, she'd lost the one thing she thought could protect her. When I returned home that evening, Laura was sitting at the dining table, staring blankly at a glass of wine. "They fired me," she said quietly, not looking up. "The board. They said I was a liability." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The final blow came later that night. As Laura sat alone in the living room, I walked in with a stack of papers, the finalized divorce agreement. I placed them on the coffee table in front of her. "What's this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your new reality," I said. "Sign the papers, Laura. It's over." Her hands trembled as she picked up the pen. "David, please." "Sign," I interrupted, my tone firm. "You don't have a choice." She stared at me, tears streaming down her face, before finally scribbling her name on the dotted line. As I walked out of the room, I felt a sense of closure. The marriage was over, the lies were exposed, and justice had been served. By Sunday, I was sitting on the balcony of my new apartment, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. Laura and Jacob had tried to destroy me, but in the end, they had destroyed themselves. I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my future. This wasn't just revenge, it was liberation.